I am quite impressed with Assassin's Creed Shadows. Ubisoft Forward just ended, and what we've seen is a very different Assassin's Creed game. One that is a lot more skill-based, that adds interesting new mechanics, and for the first time in a very long while, one that's not afraid to do something different. We of course have a first look at the new gameplay, a 10-minute walkthrough in one of the game's new regions called Fukuchiyama, and I will just say this, it looks amazing. But there are many things we're gonna break down in this video, so let's get started. Now what you're seeing right here is one of the many castle towns that we'll get to visit in Japan, and I will just say this outright, this entire scene right here looks very impressive, both graphics but also style-wise. Very dense, packed with NPCs, the rice fields look amazing, of course the graphics look insane despite the low quality of the live stream, and I will say this, there's a very high density of NPCs, both on the outsides but especially once you get into the inner parts of the settlement. I will assume that bigger settlements might have even more than this. Citizens also seem to be very aware of Yasuke's presence, which is the character first controlled in the presentation, and they will actually react quite differently from the looks of it. So some will show admiration, others are going to be intrigued, but all seem to be very aware of his presence, meaning that it's likely social stealth isn't a thing that is going to be doing too much. And while we're on the subject, Ubisoft also confirmed a bit how seasons worked in this game. So yeah, there's gonna be a full 1 year in-game cycle, which means you're going to literally see the seasons progressing from spring, summer, autumn, and then winter. And both seasons as well as weathers will influence how you play quite a bit, especially when it comes to stuff like stealth and combat, but also some other things adjacent that are outside of the combat. For example, heavy rain lets you approach or escape easier since it covers your footsteps, and thunder can also mask the sounds that you make when taking down enemies. We of course know that both light, shadows, and sound are a way to exploit enemies to your advantage. So you can also extinguish braziers and lanterns to affect their vision and more easily take guards down. It goes beyond that though, so while in the summer you could use vegetation or even water to sneak around, in the winter these methods are no longer going to be viable, so you're going to have to find other means to sneak around or take down enemies. And beyond that, there's one more thing that can happen, which is that outside of the combat, you can see that different creatures might emerge. Like for example, Yasuke playing with a dog right here, we later found out that they will more often come out during the warmer seasons, such as spring, rather than during the winter, but that's just one aspect of it. Now, mission structure wise, it looks quite similar to your typical AC formula. So talk to NPCs, they reveal information nearby, you're gonna find a bunch of baddies, maybe even torturing a bunch of innocents, and you're going to have to take down a main target. So that's pretty standard AC and pretty standard open world RPGs. What's new over here is going to be the new spy network mechanics, so you can actually send spies to scout areas to spot a target that you might be hunting via a mission or side content, or even reveal quest objectives. We know there's a spy network system in the game that lets us recruit spies and send them out in the world to find out more of this intel. But we can see that in action right here from the map menu, so we actually have the scout icon onto the left side of the screen. Pressing square in this case will let us reveal that information nearby, and there are 3 dots next to the scout in particular, and it seems that each activity is going to consume a number of these dots when we use the scout function. So for example, in this case, we can see that uncovering the intel costs 1 of those dots, but it can go up to 3 dots according to the same UI. So I'm going to assume that that's the maximum cost that we're going to get, which means we're going to have to constantly replenish these with additional scouts and other spies in our network. Also very interesting to note is that various missions, I'm going to assume story related, let us pick between which of the protagonists to pick for that specific mission. So in this case, there was an option to go head in with Yasuke or go with the more stealthy approach as Naoe. But of course, this might change depending on each mission. Anyway, let's go over the combat because both Yasuke and Naoe actually have very different and interesting mechanics. So Yasuke can be seen using a couple of weapons, starting with the Kanabo. So this is a more slow but armor breaking option. This is perfect for removing armor from the enemies' bodies. That's actually a whole mechanic in and of itself, which is going to reduce the time you need to eliminate a target. Not going to lie, it looks very satisfying as you break off each individual piece and then eventually take down the enemy with a very brutal takedown. But besides this, there's a cool new feature added, which is the new posture system, at least in the case of Yasuke. So what you can do in the middle of combat is you can hold your attacks and your posture at any moment and then unleash it to inflict massive damage or even branch into different executions against the target. So this comes with a major benefit but also a few drawbacks. One of them is that doing this will actually expose your character, which means your key here is to master your timing. Otherwise, enemies will inflict heavy damage and will definitely punish you. I find that to be very interesting, should bring a lot more meaning to the combat. It seems to be a lot more skill based, which is exactly what I wanted. It should definitely make the combat feel a lot more fun and less boring as time goes on. Another interesting mechanic, at least with the Kanabo, is Yasuke can actually parry attacks very well, at least guard against them, which seems to definitely affect the enemy's stance. Eventually, you can follow up, it seems, with very strong counters to take them off balance and follow up with other strong blunt attacks. So in this case, more easily breaking down their armor and so on. Of course, other mechanics are making a return from previous AC games. So for example, attacking still charges your adrenaline meter, so we can actually use that and spend it on special abilities such as this leaping strike that we can see Yasuke doing. Of course, I find them to be a little bit more janky. This is Ubisoft at the end of the day, but it does seem to be a very devastating blow, and Yasuke obviously does have a lot of attacks that can break through enemies. But it's not only that, because eventually he switches to the katana combat, and one thing you should know here is that you can carry up to 2 weapons at the same time with each of the 2 protagonists, so you can freely switch between them. However, let's talk about that katana combat because it looks very interesting. So it's a much more versatile and faster option than the kanabo in the case of Yasuke. So what it adds over here is that you now have different postures with it that you can switch between for the katana. So we have, for example, seen that you can switch between a low guard and a high guard against this target. I'm not exactly sure if there's anything other than that. But enemies are also quite reactive and will also adapt their own postures accordingly to also counter you. So there's this whole dance that you do with the target where you look for enemies' openings and try to take it by surprise while it's trying to defend from you and vice versa, which again seems very interesting and a lot more involved than before. But all of this doesn't even come close to how cool Naoe looks. And of course, the biggest difference when playing her is obviously her parkour animations and the new grappling hook mechanic. And specifically, first of all, there are completely new animations for Naoe when it comes to parkour, traversal, and sneaking around. We can already see that from the way she travels over rooftops, her fluidity, agility, the way she jumps all over the place. So this looks absolutely fluid and stunning, but when you combine this with her grappling hook, this is where she truly shines. You can actually climb walls quicker than any assassin that at least I've seen in any mainline Assassin's Creed game. Her parkour is also on a whole different level, so you can, for example, go straight into a grappling hook, which is completely physics based, and then jump straight into an assassination mid-swing, which again looks very fluid. Now, one of the new mechanics added for her is that she can use a prone and crawl mechanic through both vegetation but also shallow waters and ponds. And there's also an item that can help with this a little bit, which is this bamboo stick that you can use to breathe underwater. So you can actually stay there and just spy on the target or wait until it's the perfect moment to strike. According to Ubisoft, it's actually possible to pull a lot of these stunts, especially during warmer seasons such as summer or even spring when there's thunderstorms and rain and there's still water accumulations, but not so much during winter when again you're going to have to find different ways because maybe that pond is going to be frozen and you can no longer use it as a way to just go in sneaky. Besides this, she also of course takes advantage of all the new AI changes so she can extinguish lights from afar to reduce enemies' vision. Also in terms of stealth, dynamic perception of enemies, which is going to mean they can react in real time, means you can also take that to your advantage to maybe bring them in a momentary place of darkness, for example, for more easy assassinations. What I really like is that she can use her grappling hook to grab onto targets, especially non-combat targets, and take them down silently but without killing them. So there's actually a mechanic that lets her just knock out targets. We know that there's many other residents around some of these castles which can alert enemies, so this can be a good way to go in a bit more pacifistic than the usual. But of course, you can still assassinate them just as usual. Besides this, you can also grapple onto the ceiling with Naoe and then just assassinate targets passing by. Definitely seems like it's a good option, especially when you don't have other places to sneak behind. So, of course, all of this culminates in some of the coolest combat I've seen so far. So, one of her attacks uses the KhrazeGaming, which is this sickle with a chained ball at the end of it. It seems to be a very good AoE weapon, but also one that can grapple onto targets. So previously we've seen that this can be used to just grab onto targets, pull in, and immediately assassinate them, which should make her a lot more capable at this than Yasuke. But it's also great at AoE because you can spin that ball, deal more damage, and it seems to be very good at momentarily stunning or at least staggering those targets, interrupting their attacks and keeping them at a distance. Yeah, the sickle KhrazeGaming is definitely going to be my favorite weapon. Seems to be both good in close but also mid-range. Anyway, looks very exciting. Of course, Ubisoft Forward seemed very interesting. We also had Star Wars Outlaws, that seems to be a very big game, so there's gonna be another breakdown video in just a bit after this. But so far, I'm quite impressed and haven't actually been excited for a Ubisoft game for so long up until now. This might finally be the year I'm gonna give some thumbs up to Ubisoft, but we're gonna wait and see how the games pan out. This is it. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.